London, April 1814. Miss Katherine Ashton stood at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved fingers wrapped tightly around her silk fan as she surveyed the glittering assembly before her. The chandeliers cast a golden glow upon the cream and gilt decor of Hartwell House, reflecting off the jewels and polished buttons of London's elite. Another season, another endless parade of balls and soirees, each indistinguishable from the last. "You appear positively enraptured by the wallpaper, dear cousin," came a teasing voice at her shoulder. "I cannot blame you. It is far more interesting than half the gentlemen present." Catherine turned to find her cousin, Lady Emily Farrington, resplendent in pale blue silk that matched her mischievous eyes. "I was merely gathering my thoughts," Catherine replied, straightening the lace at her sleeve. "One must prepare oneself for the onslaught of tedious conversation about the weather and the shocking price of silk ribbon." Emily laughed, a bright sound that drew several admiring glances. "You are becoming positively cynical for a girl of 21. What happened to the wide-eyed debutante who arrived from Hampshire last season?" "She attended 37 balls, 19 dinners, and 14 afternoon teas," Catherine said dryly, "and discovered that London society is as predictable as the tides, if considerably less refreshing." "Well, perhaps tonight will prove different," Emily whispered, her eyes darting meaningfully toward the entrance. "They say His Royal Highness, Prince Wilhelm of Westfalia, is in attendance." Catherine raised one dark eyebrow. "Another foreign prince seeking an English bride with a substantial dowry? How novel." "Oh, do cease your grumbling," Emily chided. "He is reportedly quite handsome, speaks excellent English, and has charmed half the ton already. Even your discerning heart might find something to admire." "My heart, discerning or otherwise, is not in the market for admiration," Catherine replied, though she could not help but follow Emily's gaze toward the grand entrance. "Besides, princes do not notice daughters of country baronets, particularly ones with modest dowries and unfashionably honest tongues." "Your tongue is indeed your own worst enemy," Emily agreed, adjusting her pearl necklace. "But your beauty is a formidable ally. Even now, Lord Bentham is making his way toward us with alarming determination." Catherine suppressed a groan. Lord Bentham, a florid-faced gentleman of 50 with a penchant for young wives and excessive cologne, had been pursuing her with unwelcome persistence. "Quick," Emily whispered, "Lady Hartwell is beckoning me. I shall abandon you most cruelly to your fate, unless you wish to claim the headache that has been threatening all evening. And retire before the dancing has even begun?" "Mamma would never forgive me," Catherine sighed. "Go, traitorous creature. I shall endure his botanical metaphors and thinly veiled compliments with all the grace I can muster." As Emily glided away, Catherine steeled herself for Lord Bentham's approach, unfurling her fan with practiced nonchalance. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. "Miss Ashton, I believe," came a voice, deep and lightly accented, from her left. Catherine turned, prepared to offer a polite smile to whichever gentleman had claimed acquaintance, only to find herself looking into the most arresting pair of blue eyes she had ever encountered. The gentleman before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his golden hair swept back from a face that might have been carved by a master sculptor, strong jaw, straight nose, and lips curved in a smile that suggested he was accustomed to favorable responses. She curtsied automatically. "Yes, sir. Though I fear you have the advantage of me." "Wilhelm Yates, at your service," he replied with a slight bow. "I have had the pleasure of acquaintance with your father during my time in England." Catherine felt a flutter of confusion. This was not what she had expected of the foreign prince Emily had mentioned. His attire, though impeccable, was not ostentatious, and he bore none of the haughty demeanor she associated with royalty. Perhaps there had been some mistake? "You are acquainted with my father, Mr. Yates?" she inquired. "Indeed. Sir Thomas and I share an interest in agricultural improvements. I had the honor of visiting his estate in Hampshire last autumn, though you were in London at the time, I believe." "You are correct," Catherine acknowledged, intrigued despite herself. "Though I am surprised he did not mention your visit in his letters." Mr. Yates's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps he found other matters more worthy of mention. I understand you are quite the accomplished pianist, Miss Ashton." Katherine felt a blush creep up her neck. My father exaggerates my modest abilities, I assure you. I should like to judge for myself sometime, he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. But for now, might I be so bold as to request your hand for the next dance? I believe they are forming a set for the quadrille. Before Katherine could respond, Lord Bentham appeared at her side, his chest puffed out like a disgruntled pigeon. Miss Ashton, he boomed, I had hoped to secure your hand for the quadrille. You promised to show me that delightful step you performed at Lady Broughton's assembly. Katherine had promised no such thing and was about to say so when Mr. Yates spoke. I fear Miss Ashton has already granted me the honour, Lord Bentham, he said smoothly. Perhaps another dance? Lord Bentham's face darkened as he took proper notice of the younger man. Yates, he said stiffly. I was unaware you were acquainted with Miss Ashton. A recent but most fortunate introduction, Mr. Yates replied with an amiable smile that nonetheless brooked no argument. If you'll excuse us. Without waiting for a response, he offered Katherine his arm. She took it, partly out of a desire to escape Lord Bentham and partly because there was something utterly compelling about Mr. Yates's quiet confidence. That was rather high-handed of you, she remarked as he led her toward the dance floor. What if I had wished to dance with Lord Bentham? Mr. Yates glanced down at her, his expression amused. Did you? That is hardly the point. On the contrary, Miss Ashton, I believe it is precisely the point. Life is too short for dances one does not wish to dance, is it not? As they took their places in the set, Katherine found herself studying him with new interest. You speak as though you have some experience in unwanted obligations, Mr. Yates. A shadow crossed his face, so quickly she almost missed it. We all have our duties, Miss Ashton. The trick is finding joy within their execution. The music began, and Katherine found herself swept into the pattern of the dance. Mr. Yates moved with unexpected grace for a man of his stature, guiding her through the figures with a light but sure touch. When their hands met, she felt a curious warmth that lingered even after they parted to circle other partners. You dance well for an agricultural enthusiast, she observed when they came together again. And you converse well for a cynical debutante, he countered, his eyes sparkling with humour. Katherine felt a startled laugh escape her. Touché, sir. Though I do not recall presenting myself as cynical. Your expression when surveying the ballroom earlier spoke volumes. You looked as though you were cataloguing every predictable conversation and tedious encounter yet to come. You were watching me? Katherine asked, both disconcerted and flattered by the notion. I observe everyone, Miss Ashton. It is a habit that has served me well. The dance brought them close again, and he lowered his voice. But I will admit, you were particularly worth observing. Before she could form a suitable reply, they were separated by the figures of the dance. Katherine found her heart beating faster than the exertion warranted, and she chided herself for such schoolgirl foolishness. Mr. Yates was merely being charming, as gentlemen often were when they wished to make a favourable impression. Yet when the music ended and he bowed over her hand, she felt a distinct reluctance to part company. Thank you for the dance, Miss Ashton, he said. I hope we might converse further this evening. Perhaps during supper? I believe I am engaged to my cousin's party for supper, she replied, but I would be pleased to continue our acquaintance another time. A flash of disappointment crossed his features before he composed them into a polite smile. Of course. Another time. As he escorted her back to Emily's side, Katherine was acutely aware of the many eyes upon them, including those of her mother, who was regarding Mr. Yates with undisguised interest from her seat among the chaperons. I shall take my leave, Miss Ashton, Mr. Yates said, bowing once more. It has been a pleasure. As he walked away, Emily seized Katherine's arm with barely contained excitement. Who was that magnificent creature, and why have you been keeping him a secret? I only just met him myself, Katherine protested. His name is Wilhelm Yates, and he is apparently acquainted with Papa from some agricultural venture. Emily's eyes widened. Yates? Are you certain? Of course I am certain. Why would you ask such a thing? Before Emily could respond, their hostess, Lady Hartwell, approached with a look of barely suppressed excitement. "Miss Ashton, I see you have made the acquaintance of the prince. How delightful! You must tell me everything." Catherine stared at her blankly. "The prince? I fear there has been some misunderstanding. I was dancing with Mr. Wilhelm Yates." Lady Hartwell tittered behind her fan. "Oh, my dear, that is his incognito name when he wishes to move about without the burden of his title. Did he not reveal himself? How utterly charming! His Royal Highness, Prince Wilhelm of Westfalia, is indeed touring England under the name Yates, a play on the royal house of Yates Hire." As Lady Hartwell moved away to greet other guests, Catherine turned to Emily in shock. "I dance with a prince?" And accused him of being high-handed. Emily's delighted laughter did nothing to soothe her mortification. "Oh, Catherine, only you could unwittingly insult royalty and live to tell the tale. What else did you say to him?" "I hardly recall," Catherine murmured, scanning the room for a glimpse of golden hair. "But I believe I also refused his invitation to supper." "You refused?" Emily broke off, shaking her head in disbelief. "Well, that explains why the Duchess of Hereford is looking at you as though you've sprouted a second head. No one refuses a prince." "I did not know he was a prince," Catherine hissed. "He presented himself as a simple Mr. Yates with an interest in crop rotation." "Perhaps he wished to be appreciated for himself rather than his title," Emily suggested. "It would be a novel experience for one of his position." Catherine's retort died on her lips as she spotted the prince, for it was indeed he, deep in conversation with the Earl of Wexford on the far side of the room. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up, meeting her eyes across the crowded ballroom. For a moment, Catherine could not breathe. Then he smiled, a private smile meant only for her, and inclined his head slightly before returning his attention to the Earl. "Well," Emily said softly, observing the exchange. "It seems the prince has indeed taken notice of a baronet's daughter with an unfashionably honest tongue." Catherine turned away, her cheeks burning. "It was only a dance, Emily. Nothing more." But as the evening progressed, Catherine found her eyes repeatedly drawn to Prince Wilhelm. He danced with several ladies of high rank, conversed with various dignitaries, and charmed everyone in his path, yet she could not shake the feeling that he was always aware of her location in the room. During the supper dance, Catherine found herself partnered with the amiable but dull Mr. Fenwick, while the prince escorted Lady Sophia Devereux, a diamond of the first water with a dowry to match her beauty. They made a striking couple, and Catherine told herself firmly that the twinge she felt was merely indigestion from Mrs. Hartwell's notoriously rich syllabub. "I understand you had the honor of dancing with Prince Wilhelm earlier," Mr. Fenwick remarked as they promenaded down the set. "Half the young ladies present are positively green with envy." "It was a pleasant surprise," Catherine replied neutrally. "Though I did not realize his identity at the time." Mr. Fenwick chuckled. "Yes, he does enjoy his little game of anonymity. Not that it lasts long in London society. The gossips would uncover a disguised chimney sweep if he had royal blood." "You seem well informed about the prince's habits." "We were at Oxford together briefly," Mr. Fenwick explained. "He attended incognito, of course, but those of us in certain circles were aware. Dashed good fellow, though a bit reserved. Never joined in the wilder entertainments, if you take my meaning." Catherine, who did not entirely take his meaning but could guess, merely nodded. "Word is his seeking a bride while in England," Mr. Fenwick continued, oblivious to her discomfort with the topic. "His father is eager for an alliance with British nobility. The betting books at White's favour Lady Sophia or perhaps Lady Caroline Bristow." "How charming to know that matrimony has become a sporting event for gentlemen to wager upon," Catherine remarked dryly. "What are the odds on a baron's daughter with a modest dowry and unfashionable opinions?" Mr. Fenwick laughed, taking her sarcasm for jest. "Ah, Miss Ashton, you are a delight. But surely you do not aspire to catch a prince?" "I assure you, Mr. Fenwick, I aspire to catch no one at all." As the dance ended, Catherine excused herself to join Emily for supper. They were seated at a table with several other young ladies and their partners, but Catherine found herself distracted, her attention drawn to the head table where the prince dined with Lady Hartwell and the most illustrious guests. "He has looked this way 7 times during the soup course alone," Emily whispered behind her napkin. "I have been counting." Catherine refused to acknowledge the comment, instead turning her attention to Mr. Fenwick's sister, who was seated across from them. "I understand your family summers in Bath, Miss Fenwick. How do you find the waters?" The conversation turned to the merits of various spa towns, and Catherine was beginning to relax when a hush fell over the supper room. She looked up to find Prince Wilhelm standing beside her chair. "Miss Ashton," he said with a bow, "I hope you will forgive the interruption, but I believe you promised to tell me about your favorite walks in Hampshire. Might I escort you to the terrace for a moment? The night air is particularly fine." Catherine knew she had promised no such thing, just as she knew that accepting his invitation would set every tongue in the room wagging. Yet she found herself rising, her voice steady despite the thunder of her heart. "Of course, Your Highness." As he offered his arm, Catherine was acutely aware of Emily's wide eyes and the speculative murmurs that rippled through the assembly. She placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve, allowing him to lead her through the French doors onto the lamplit terrace. The April night was indeed mild, the air perfumed with early blooms from the gardens below. Several couples strolled along the stone balustrade, providing sufficient chaperonage to prevent scandal while allowing for relatively private conversation. "You should not have done that," Catherine said quietly as they moved away from the doors. "You have made me the object of every gossip in London." "Is that so terrible?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "To be noticed?" "It is when the notoriety stems from false expectations," she replied firmly. "Why did you not tell me who you were, Your Highness?" He sighed, gazing out over the darkened gardens. "Because for those few moments during our dance, I was simply a man conversing with a woman who interested him, not a prince performing a duty." "And what duty might that be?" Catherine asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "I am here to forge connections, political and personal," he said carefully. "My father believes an English bride would strengthen our alliance with Britain in these uncertain times." "And you agree with him?" Prince Wilhelm turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the gentle lamplight. "I agree that alliances are necessary. But I had hoped to find something more than a political arrangement. Something real." Catherine felt a treacherous flutter of hope before ruthlessly suppressing it. "Reality is seldom a consideration in royal marriages, I believe." "Perhaps not in the past," he acknowledged. "But I am fortunate to live in more progressive times, with a father who values my happiness alongside my duty." "And what would make you happy, Your Highness?" The question escaped her lips before she could recall it. For a moment, he seemed startled by her directness. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Honesty. Intelligence. A woman who sees Wilhelm before she sees the prince." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "A woman, perhaps, who would tell a royal personage he was being high-handed." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "I apologize for my impertinence." "I did not know." "No," he interrupted gently. "That is precisely my point. You did not know, and so you spoke your mind. Do you know how rare that is in my world, Miss Ashton? How precious?" Before she could form a response, Lady Hartwell appeared at the terrace doors, her voice carrying across the stone expanse. "Your Highness, the Duchess of Hereford has been asking for you. She wishes to introduce her niece, Lady Caroline." Prince Wilhelm's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he composed his features into a polite smile. "Of course, Lady Hartwell. I shall attend her directly." He turned back to Catherine. "It seems duty calls, Miss Ashton." "As it always must," she replied, attempting to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Thank you for the pleasure of your company, Your Highness." He took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that, while entirely proper, seemed to contain volumes of unspoken meaning. "This is not our last conversation, Miss Ashton. I hope you will grant me the honor of another dance before the evening ends." As he escorted her back inside, Katherine felt as though she had stepped into one of the fairy tales her nurse had told her as a child, enchanting but ultimately unreal. Princes did not choose baronets' daughters, no matter how enjoyable they found their conversation. She would do well to remember that. Yet when the orchestra struck up a waltz, still considered daringly intimate despite its growing acceptance, and Prince Wilhelm appeared before her with a bow and a questioning look, Katherine found herself accepting his hand without hesitation. "I have secured your mother's permission," he informed her as they took their place among the dancers. Though she seemed quite overcome by the request, Katherine smiled despite herself. "I imagine she is already composing letters to all our relations in Hampshire, announcing my imminent elevation to royalty." "And how would you feel about such an elevation?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious as he guided her into the first sweeping turn of the waltz. "I hardly think my feelings on the matter are relevant, Your Highness," she replied carefully. "Surely your bride must bring more to an alliance than a preference for honest conversation." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You undervalue yourself, Miss Ashton. Beauty, intelligence, and sincerity are rare qualities in combination." "You forgot to mention my substantial dowry and illustrious lineage," she countered with gentle irony. "Oh wait, I possess neither." The prince laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You are determined to be practical, I see. One of us must be." They danced in silence for several measures, the music swelling around them as they moved in perfect harmony. Katherine was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his eyes never left her face. "What if I told you," he said finally, "that Westphalia's constitution permits the sovereign to marry for love, provided the bride is of good character and family? Not necessarily of royal or even noble birth." Katherine's steps faltered slightly, though his steady guidance prevented any noticeable misstep. "I would say that is a surprisingly progressive view for a European monarchy. My great-grandmother was a merchant's daughter," he explained. "She saved my great-grandfather's life when he was traveling incognito through Bavaria. He loved her so deeply that he changed the laws of succession rather than live without her." "A romantic tale," Katherine acknowledged. "Though I imagine the court advisers were less than pleased." "They adapted, as courtiers always do when faced with a determined sovereign," Prince Wilhelm replied with a hint of steel beneath his charm. "She became one of our most beloved and respected queens." The music was drawing to a close, and Katherine felt a sudden panic at the thought that this magical interlude would end, leaving her with nothing but memories and regrets. "Why are you telling me this, Your Highness?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the final strains of the waltz. The dance ended, but he did not immediately release her hand. "Because I want you to understand that while duty shapes my choices, it need not dictate them entirely." His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And because I should like your permission to call upon you tomorrow." Before she could respond, they were surrounded by other dancers making their way from the floor. The prince bowed correctly, thanking her for the dance, and Katherine found herself swept back to Emily's side in a daze of confusion and impossible hope. "Well?" Emily demanded as soon as they had a moment of privacy. "What did he say?" "You were looking at each other as though the rest of the ballroom had vanished entirely." "He asked permission to call tomorrow," Katherine admitted, still scarcely believing it herself. Emily clutched her arm. "Katherine! Do you know what this means? He is singling you out for attention." "The prince!" "It is merely a social call," Katherine insisted, though her heart raced at the memory of his words. "Nothing more." But as the evening drew to a close and Prince Wilhelm sought her out once more to bid her good night, the look in his eyes suggested it might indeed be something more, something that both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. "Until tomorrow, Miss Ashton," he said softly, bowing over her hand. "Until tomorrow, Your Highness," she replied, curtsying deeply. As her carriage bore her home through the lamplit London streets, Katherine stared unseeing at the passing shadows. One dance had somehow become two, and then a terrace conversation, and now a formal call. What would tomorrow bring? And more importantly, what would she do when the fairy tale inevitably ended? Little did she know that Prince Wilhelm of Westphalia had no intention of allowing their story to end, for what had begun as just another dance had awakened in him a determination that would change both their lives forever. The morning brought rain pattering against the windows of the Ashton townhouse, matching the nervous rhythm of Catherine's heart as she sat with her embroidery in the drawing-room. She had risen early, unable to sleep for thinking of the previous night's events, and now found herself watching the clock with mortifying attentiveness. "Do stop fidgeting, Catherine," her mother admonished from across the room. "It is most unbecoming." "I am not fidgeting, Mamma," Catherine replied, though she immediately stilled her tapping foot. "I am merely concentrating on my stitches." Lady Ashton regarded her daughter with fond exasperation. "You have been working on the same flower for nearly an hour, and it appears to be growing rather than blooming under your needle." Catherine glanced down at her hoop and saw that her mother was right. The rose she had been embroidering was a tangled mess of crimson threads, bearing little resemblance to the delicate pattern she had begun with. "I suppose I am somewhat distracted," she admitted, setting aside the hoop. As any young lady would be, having captured the attention of royalty, Lady Ashton said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "Though I still cannot fathom how it occurred. You have never shown the least interest in making an advantageous match." "I have shown interest in making a happy one," Catherine corrected. "Which is not the same thing at all." "And you believe a prince might make you happy?" her mother asked, more shrewdly than Catherine had expected. She considered the question carefully. "I do not know Prince Wilhelm well enough to answer that. But I found his conversation engaging and his manner sincere." Lady Ashton nodded thoughtfully. Sincerity is indeed a rare quality, particularly among those born to privilege. She paused, studying her daughter with unusual gravity. "Just be cautious with your heart, my dear. Royal attention is flattering, but royal intentions are not always what young ladies might hope." Before Catherine could respond, Wilkins, their butler, appeared at the drawing-room door. "Your Highness, Prince Wilhelm of Westphalia," he announced with barely concealed excitement, his usual composure overcome by the grandeur of their visitor. The prince entered the room with the easy confidence of one accustomed to commanding attention, yet there was a warmth in his smile as his eyes found Catherine that belied any hint of arrogance. He was dressed more formally than at the previous night's ball, his tailored blue coat and cream waistcoat emphasizing his athletic build, a small but ornate pin, presumably some royal insignia, gleaming at his cravat. Lady Ashton rose and curtsied deeply. "Your Highness, this is indeed an honor." "The honor is mine, Lady Ashton," he replied, bowing over her hand. "Thank you for receiving me in your lovely home." His gaze shifted to Catherine, who had risen and curtsied as well, her heart thundering in her chest. "Miss Ashton, you are even more radiant by daylight." "Your Highness is too kind," she murmured, fighting the blush that threatened to consume her face. "Not kind, merely observant," he corrected with a smile that reached his eyes. "I hope I find you well after last night's festivities." "Quite well, thank you," Catherine replied, gesturing to the settee. "Won't you please be seated?" As the prince took his place, Catherine noticed a small leather-bound volume tucked beneath his arm. Catching her glance, he held it up. "I took the liberty of bringing a book I thought might interest you. You mentioned your fondness for poetry last night, particularly the works of Mr. Wordsworth." Catherine blinked in surprise. She had indeed mentioned Wordsworth during their waltz, but only in passing. That he had remembered and brought a volume specifically for her was both flattering and strangely touching. "That is most thoughtful," she said, accepting the book. Opening it, she discovered a first edition of Wordsworth's latest collection, the pages still crisp and new. "Oh, this is a treasure." "I am pleased you think so," Prince Wilhelm replied, his expression softening. "I find his observations on nature and human emotion quite profound, though some of my countrymen prefer our German poets. An appreciation of beauty transcends national boundaries, does it not?" Catherine suggested, carefully placing the book on the side table. "Indeed it does," he agreed, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that left no doubt as to his meaning. Lady Ashton cleared her throat delicately. "Your Highness, might I offer you some refreshment? We have a particularly fine tea from India." Tea would be most welcome, he replied graciously. As Lady Ashton rang for the service, Katherine sought for a suitably neutral topic of conversation. I understand you have been in England for some months now. How do you find our country compared to Westphalia? Both have their charms, Prince Wilhelm answered diplomatically. England possesses a verdant beauty and rich cultural tradition that is quite captivating. But I admit to missing the mountains of home, particularly in spring when the alpine meadows bloom. It sounds lovely, Katherine said sincerely. I have never travelled beyond England's shores. My knowledge of the continent is limited to books and travellers' accounts. Perhaps someday you might see it for yourself, he suggested, his tone light but his eyes intent. Westphalia welcomes visitors, especially those with an appreciation for natural beauty and honest conversation. The arrival of the tea service provided Katherine with a momentary respite from the intensity of his regard. As she poured the steaming amber liquid into delicate porcelain cups, she tried to steady her nerves. This was merely a social call, she reminded herself. The prince was being courteous, nothing more. Yet as the conversation continued, touching on literature, music, and the current political situation in Europe following Napoleon's exile to Elba, Katherine found herself increasingly drawn to Prince Wilhelm's intelligence and thoughtfulness. He listened as attentively as he spoke, seeming genuinely interested in her opinions on everything from poetry to agricultural reform. You mentioned your father's experiments with crop rotation, he said as he accepted a second cup of tea. I should like to visit his estate again when I tour the southern counties next month. Perhaps you might be in residence then as well. Before Katherine could respond, Lady Ashton interjected eagerly. We had planned to return to Hampshire after the season, Your Highness, but could certainly adjust our schedule to accommodate your visit. Katherine shot her mother a quelling look. What Mamma means to say is that we would be honoured to receive you at Ashton Manor whenever your travels bring you to Hampshire. Prince Wilhelm's lips quirked in a smile that suggested he was not fooled by her diplomatic correction. Thank you both for your kind invitation. I shall look forward to it most keenly. He set down his cup and rose, signalling the end of his visit. I fear I have other engagements this afternoon, though I would much prefer to continue our conversation. Lady Ashton rose as well, curtsying. We understand the demands on your time, Your Highness. It has been a great honour to receive you. The honour has been mine, he replied with perfect courtesy before turning to Katherine. Miss Ashton, might I be so bold as to request your presence at the Duchess of Hereford's musical evening tomorrow? I understand your family has received an invitation. Katherine was momentarily speechless. The Duchess's musical evenings were among the most exclusive gatherings of the season, and while they had indeed received an invitation, likely due to Emily's connection to the Duchess's nephew, she had not expected the prince to single her out so publicly again. We would be delighted to attend, Lady Ashton answered when Katherine hesitated. Would we not, Katherine? Yes, of course, Katherine managed, finding her voice. Thank you for thinking of us, Your Highness. As he took his leave, bowing over her hand with that same lingering touch that sent warmth spreading through her entire body, Katherine caught a gleam in his eye that spoke of unfinished conversations and possibilities yet to be explored. The moment the front door closed behind him, Lady Ashton turned to Katherine with barely contained excitement. A prince, Katherine! And he brought you a book of poetry. This exceeds my wildest hopes for your season. Mamma, please, Katherine protested, though she could not help the smile that tugged at her lips. It was merely a courtesy call. Courtesy calls do not include personal invitations to the Duchess of Hereford's musical evening, Lady Ashton retorted, already mentally cataloguing Katherine's wardrobe for a suitable gown. No, my dear, this was something far more significant. The prince is interested in you. As her mother bustled off to inform the sempstress of their urgent need for alterations to Katherine's best evening gown, Katherine sank back onto the settee, her fingers tracing the embossed leather of the Wordsworth volume Prince Wilhelm had brought her. Opening it again, she noticed something she had missed before, a small slip of paper marking one of the poems. Turning to the page, she found she dwelt among the untrodden ways, Wordsworth's ode to a simple girl of natural beauty and grace, overlooked by the world but precious to the poet who had noticed her. And beneath the poem, Written in a strong, elegant hand, were the words, "Some treasures are hidden from common view, requiring a more discerning eye to discover their worth." Katherine closed the book carefully, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. This was no mere courtesy call indeed. But what exactly it was, and where it might lead, remained to be seen. The Duchess of Hereford's musical evening was everything London society deemed elegant and refined: exquisitely dressed guests, virtuoso performances on pianoforte and harp, and the subtle but constant calculations of rank and connection that underpinned every social interaction of the ton. Katherine, resplendent in a gown of deep emerald silk that her mother's seamstress had somehow transformed overnight with delicate silver embroidery at the hem and bodice, found herself the object of considerable attention as she entered the Duchess's grand salon on her father's arm. "Everyone is staring," she whispered to Sir Thomas, who had arrived from Hampshire just that morning, summoned by his wife's urgent letter about royal interest in their daughter. "Let them stare," he replied with the quiet confidence that had always been his hallmark. "You are worth looking at, my dear." Katherine squeezed his arm gratefully. Her father had always been her stanchest ally, encouraging her reading and independent thinking even when her mother fretted that such qualities might render her unmarriageable. As they made their way through the crowded room, Katherine was acutely aware of the speculative glances and whispered conversations that followed in their wake. Word of Prince Wilhelm's call had spread through London society with predictable speed, spawning rumours that ranged from a casual flirtation to an imminent royal engagement. "Miss Ashton," came a familiar voice, and Katherine turned to find Emily approaching with her parents. "You look absolutely enchanting. That shade of green is perfect with your colouring." "Thank you," Katherine replied, grateful for her cousin's friendly presence amid the curious stares. "Though I fear I shall never hear the end of it from my mother's seamstress, who was made to work through the night on these alterations." Emily lowered her voice. "Everyone is talking about the prince's visit to your home." Lady Jersey was positively apoplectic with curiosity when she cornered Mamma earlier. "There is nothing to tell," Katherine insisted, though she felt the weight of the small volume of poetry she had tucked into her reticule. She had brought it on impulse, unsure if she would have an opportunity to thank the prince privately for his gift. It was a brief, perfectly proper call. With a personal invitation to tonight's gathering, Emily reminded her. "And look, he has just arrived, and his eyes are already searching the room. 3 guesses as to whom he seeks." Katherine resisted the urge to turn immediately, instead taking a moment to compose herself before glancing casually toward the entrance. Prince Wilhelm stood in conversation with the Duchess, his tall figure commanding attention in his formal evening attire. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up, his eyes finding hers across the crowded salon. The smile that crossed his face was brief but unmistakable, and Katherine felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. She inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to Emily, who was watching the exchange with undisguised fascination. "Well, that was illuminating," Emily remarked. "I have never seen a man's entire countenance transform quite so dramatically at the mere sight of a lady." "You exaggerate," Katherine protested, though a small, treacherous part of her hoped Emily was right. "I do not," Emily insisted. "And neither does he, if his purposeful approach is any indication." Sure enough, Prince Wilhelm was making his way toward them, navigating the sea of eager faces with practiced ease, his destination clearly fixed. Katherine straightened her shoulders, determined to maintain her composure despite the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "Miss Ashton," he greeted her with a bow before acknowledging the others. "Sir Thomas, Lady Ashton, Lady Emily. It is a pleasure to see you all this evening." "The pleasure is ours, Your Highness," Sir Thomas replied, studying the prince with keen but friendly interest. "I understand you have honoured our London home with a visit." "Indeed," Prince Wilhelm confirmed. "Miss Ashton and I discovered a shared appreciation for Wordsworth's poetry at Lady Hartwell's ball. I merely wished to continue our discussion." His eyes met Katherine's, and she felt the weight of everything unspoken in that simple statement. "Your gift was most thoughtful, Your Highness," she said, finding her voice. "I have been enjoying it greatly." "I am pleased to hear it," he replied, a hint of warmth colouring his tone. "Perhaps you might favour us with your thoughts on his latest work during the interval between performances?" I notice there is a charming alcove with a view of the gardens that would afford some quiet for literary discussion. The invitation was perfectly proper. They would be in full view of the company while still able to converse without shouting over the music, yet Katherine sensed it was more than a casual request. This was a deliberate choice to seek her company amid all the eligible young ladies of the ton. "I should like that very much," she replied, ignoring her mother's barely suppressed sound of delight. "Excellent," Prince Wilhelm said. "Until then, I fear protocol demands I pay my respects to various dignitaries. The burden of diplomatic courtesy, I'm afraid." With another bow, he moved away, immediately engaged by an elderly gentleman whom Katherine recognized as the Foreign Secretary. "Well, well," Sir Thomas murmured, watching the prince's retreating figure. "It seems our Katherine has made quite an impression." "As I have been trying to tell you," Lady Ashton replied triumphantly. "This could be the match of the decade." "Let us not get ahead of ourselves, my dear," Sir Thomas cautioned, though his eyes twinkled as he regarded his daughter. "Though I must say, I found the young man impressive when he visited Ashton Manor last autumn. Intelligent, well-informed, and surprisingly down-to-earth for one of his station." Katherine looked at her father in surprise. "You never mentioned his visit in your letters." Sir Thomas shrugged. "He asked to be treated as Mr. Yates, an agricultural enthusiast, not as royalty. I respected his wish for privacy." He paused, his expression softening. "Though I will admit to wondering what might happen if he ever met my spirited daughter." Before Katherine could question him further, the Duchess announced the beginning of the musical program, and they took their seats for the first performance. Throughout the Italian soprano's passionate rendition of Mozart, Katherine found herself glancing toward Prince Wilhelm, seated among the diplomatic corps across the room. More than once, she caught him looking her way, his expression thoughtful. During the interval, as guests rose to circulate and take refreshment, Katherine made her way to the alcove the prince had indicated. Large windows overlooked the Duchess's famed rose garden, now silvered by moonlight. She stood admiring the view, gathering her thoughts, when she felt rather than heard someone approach. "The English garden at night has its own particular magic, does it not?" Prince Wilhelm asked, coming to stand beside her. "In Westphalia, our formal gardens are beautiful but perhaps less romantic in their design." "I have always loved gardens by moonlight," Katherine admitted. "Everything familiar becomes mysterious, full of possibilities." He turned to face her, his expression serious despite his smile. "Rather like people, wouldn't you say? We present one face to the world, while moonlight and poetry reveal another." Katherine felt the conversation shifting beneath the surface, moving toward something deeper than garden design or literary preferences. "Is that why you travel as Mr. Yates? To reveal, or perhaps discover, a different facet of yourself?" "Partly," he acknowledged. "When I am Wilhelm Yates, people respond to me, not to my title or the political advantages of my favor. It is refreshing." "And which is the real you?" Katherine asked boldly. "The prince or Mr. Yates?" His eyes held hers, clear and direct. "They are both me, though perhaps Mr. Yates is closer to the man I would be if circumstances had been different." He paused, his voice softening. "The question is, which do you prefer?" The directness of his question startled her. I have not known either long enough to make such a judgment." "Yet you must have formed some impression," he pressed gently. "You do not strike me as a lady who withholds her opinions." Katherine considered her words carefully, aware of the weight this conversation might carry. "I found Mr. Yates refreshingly forthright and genuinely interested in ideas rather than mere social pleasantries. The prince seems equally thoughtful, though perhaps more guarded, as his position would necessitate." "A diplomatic answer," Prince Wilhelm observed, though he did not seem displeased. "Would you permit me to ask something less diplomatic?" Katherine felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. "You may ask, though I cannot promise to answer." His lips curved in a smile that reached his eyes. "Fair enough. Miss Ashton, would you consider allowing me to court you properly? Not as a prince seeking a political alliance, but as a man who finds himself increasingly captivated by a woman of remarkable intelligence and spirit." The question hung between them, fraught with implications that Katherine could scarcely begin to untangle. The rational part of her mind screamed caution. They had met but twice. He was a foreign prince with duties and expectations she could hardly fathom, and the difference in their stations was vast. Yet her heart, treacherous organ that it was, leapt at his words. "Your Highness," she began, only to be gently interrupted. "Wilhelm, please. At least when we speak privately." Katherine took a steadying breath. "Wilhelm, then. I am deeply honored by your interest, but I must ask, what purpose would such a courtship serve? Surely your position requires a match of greater political advantage than a baronet's daughter could provide." "Politics has its place in royal marriages, certainly," he conceded. "But Westphalia's alliances are secure, and my father has given me unusual latitude in my choice of bride." His eyes held hers intently. "He wants for me what he found with my mother, a partnership based on mutual respect and affection, not merely diplomatic convenience." "And you believe such a partnership might be possible between us?" Katherine asked, hardly daring to believe the direction this conversation was taking. "We are virtual strangers." "All relationships begin somewhere," Wilhelm replied, his voice warm. "I merely ask for the opportunity to know you better, and for you to know me, both the prince and the man. If, after a proper courtship, you find me wanting, or decide that royal life is not to your taste, I would accept your decision with regret but without resentment." Katherine studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity or calculation, but found only earnest hope and a vulnerability that touched her deeply. "My father would say I am being impulsive," she said finally, "but yes, I would consider such a courtship." The smile that broke across Wilhelm's face was radiant, transforming his handsome features with genuine joy. "You have made me very happy, Katherine, if I may call you Katherine." "You may," she replied, her own smile breaking through despite her efforts at composure. "Though I suspect we have just fueled a fortnight's worth of gossip for the ton." Wilhelm glanced around the room, where more than a few curious eyes were trained on their tete-a-tete in the alcove. "Let them talk," he said with a dismissive gesture. "What matters is that we understand each other." As they rejoined the company for the second half of the musical program, Katherine was aware of a shift in the atmosphere, a heightened curiosity, a buzz of speculation that followed them like a tangible cloud. But for once, she found herself impervious to society scrutiny, buoyed by the extraordinary possibility that had just opened before her. Prince Wilhelm of Westphalia wished to court her, Katherine Ashton, not for her connections or fortune, but for herself. It was like something from a fairy tale, improbable, perhaps even inadvisable, but undeniably, intoxicatingly real. As the evening drew to a close and Wilhelm bowed over her hand in farewell, his touch lingering just a moment longer than strict propriety might allow, Katherine knew with sudden clarity that her life had irrevocably changed. What had begun as just another dance had become the first step in a journey she could never have imagined, a journey that might lead to places she had only dreamed of, with a man who saw beyond titles to the heart beneath. "Until tomorrow," Wilhelm murmured, his eyes promising far more than his words conveyed. "Until tomorrow," Katherine replied, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within. As her family's carriage bore them home through London's lamplit streets, Katherine gazed out at the passing shadows, the small volume of poetry pressed against her heart, and allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe in the possibility of a love that transcended boundaries of rank and nation. The dance, it seemed, had only just begun. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity that left Katherine's head spinning. True to his word, Prince Wilhelm, or simply Wilhelm, as she had come to think of him during their increasingly comfortable private conversations, pursued his courtship with a dedication that both thrilled and discomforted her. There were carefully chaperoned carriage rides through Hyde Park, where fashionable London gathered to see and be seen. There were visits to exhibitions and galleries, where Wilhelm's genuine appreciation for art matched her own. There were intimate dinner parties at the homes of mutual acquaintances, where they sat close enough to converse but always under the watchful eyes of society. And there were letters, wonderful, revealing letters that arrived daily, sharing thoughts too personal for public expression, discussing books they had both read, debating ideas that interested them, and gradually laying bare the character of the man behind the princely title. It was in these letters that Katherine came to know the real Wilhelm, his sense of duty balanced by a quiet rebelliousness, his love for his homeland tempered by progressive ideas about governance, his dry humor and occasional flashes of vulnerability that he kept carefully hidden from the world. "You appear to be in an excellent mood this morning," Emily observed as they strolled through Gunther's tea shop, having just indulged in ices despite the relatively mild May weather. "Another letter from your prince." Catherine felt her cheeks warm but did not deny it. "He writes beautifully," she admitted. "And honestly, I feel I know him better through his letters than I might through 100 public encounters." Emily squeezed her arm affectionately. "I am so happy for you, Catherine. Though I must say, you have set an impossibly high standard for the rest of us. How am I to settle for a mere viscount or baron now that my cousin is being courted by royalty?" Catherine laughed, though her expression soon grew serious. "It still seems unreal, Emily. Like a dream from which I might wake at any moment." "It is quite real," Emily assured her. "The betting books at White's have shifted entirely in your favor, according to my brother. And Lady Jersey has been practically begging Mamma for details of your background, as though searching for some hidden royal connection that might explain the prince's interest." "She will be disappointed, then," Catherine replied dryly. "We are respectable but decidedly ordinary in our lineage." "Perhaps that is precisely what appeals to him," Emily suggested thoughtfully. "A respite from the calculated maneuvering of those with ambitions to royal favor." Before Catherine could respond, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to find Lord Bentham approaching, his florid face set in an expression of forced joviality that immediately put her on guard. "Miss Ashton, Lady Emily," he greeted them with a bow. "What a delightful surprise to encounter you ladies on such a pleasant morning." "Lord Bentham," Catherine acknowledged politely, noting the calculating gleam in his eye. "We were just returning home after taking an ice at Gunther's." "Ah, the simple pleasures of youth," he remarked with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Though I imagine your pleasures have become considerably less simple of late, Miss Ashton. The attention of a prince must be quite stimulating." The insinuation in his tone made Catherine stiffen. "His Highness has been most kind," she replied neutrally. Indeed, Lord Bentham agreed, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Though one wonders how long such kindness might last. Royal dalliances are notoriously fleeting, are they not? Here today, forgotten tomorrow." Emily drew herself up indignantly. "I hardly think Prince Wilhelm's honourable attentions could be characterised as a dalliance, my lord." Lord Bentham merely smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Of course, Lady Emily. I meant no offence. I merely offer a word of caution from one who has observed court life for many years. It would be a shame for Miss Ashton to pin her hopes on what may prove to be merely a passing royal fancy." Catherine felt a cold knot form in her stomach, but years of social training allowed her to maintain her composure. "Your concern is noted, Lord Bentham, though quite unnecessary. Now if you'll excuse us, we must return to my mother, who is expecting us." As they walked away, Emily muttered furiously under her breath, "The nerve of that odious man! As if he knows anything of Prince Wilhelm's intentions." "He is not the first to express such sentiments," Catherine said quietly. "And I doubt he will be the last." The truth was, despite the joy of Wilhelm's courtship, doubts had begun to creep into Catherine's mind during the quiet hours of night. Would a prince raised to rule really choose a baronet's daughter for his bride? Could love, if indeed that was what was growing between them, truly overcome the vast differences in their stations and expectations? That evening, as Catherine prepared for the Countess of Wexford's ball, these questions weighed heavily upon her mind. She stood before her mirror as her lady's maid put the finishing touches to her hair, wondering if she was setting herself up for heartbreak. "You look beautiful, my dear," Lady Ashton declared as she entered the room, resplendent in purple silk and diamonds. "The prince will be enchanted." Catherine smoothed the skirts of her gown, a creation of pale gold satin that her mother had commissioned at considerable expense from Madame Devi, the most fashionable modiste in London. "Mamma, do you ever worry that this situation is too good to be true?" Lady Ashton's expression softened as she came to stand beside her daughter. "It is natural to have doubts, Catherine. The difference in your stations is considerable, and the scrutiny you face is intense. She adjusted a curl at Catherine's temple with maternal tenderness. But I have seen how he looks at you. That is not the gaze of a man engaged in mere flirtation. Lord Bentham suggested today that royal attentions are typically fleeting, Catherine admitted. That I am foolish to believe it might be otherwise. Lady Ashton's face hardened. Lord Bentham is a disappointed suitor whose pride has been wounded. Pay him no mind. She took her daughter's hands in hers. Trust your heart, Catherine. And trust the man who has consistently shown himself worthy of your regard. Buoyed by her mother's unexpected support, Catherine descended to the carriage with renewed confidence. The Wexford ball was one of the highlights of the season, and as their carriage joined the line of elegant conveyances approaching the brilliantly lit mansion, she felt a flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing Wilhelm again. The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived, the cream of London society gathered in their finest array. Catherine moved through the throng beside her parents, acutely aware of the whispers and glances that followed her progress. 2 weeks of royal courtship had elevated her from unremarkable debutante to the most talked-about young lady of the season. There he is, Sir Thomas murmured, nodding toward the far side of the room where Wilhelm stood conversing with the Earl of Wexford and several other gentlemen. As though sensing their arrival, he looked up, his face brightening visibly as he caught sight of Catherine. With a word to his companions, he made his way toward them, navigating the crowded floor with easy grace. Miss Ashton, he greeted her with a bow, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. You are radiant this evening. Your Highness, she replied with a curtsy, her pulse quickening at his admiring gaze. You are too kind. Not kind, merely truthful, he corrected with the private smile that had become so dear to her. He turned to her parents, exchanging pleasantries before returning his attention to Catherine. I hope I might claim your hand for the first waltz? And perhaps a turn about the terrace afterward? The night is exceptionally fine. I should like that very much, Catherine replied, her earlier doubts receding in the warmth of his presence. As they moved away to greet other acquaintances, Catherine found herself surrounded by young ladies eager for details of her royal courtship. She answered their questions with as much grace as she could muster, though their thinly veiled envy and curiosity made her uncomfortable. Is it true that he sends you poetry every morning? Asked Miss Penelope Winters, a debutante whose ambitious mamma had set her cap at every eligible bachelor in London. The Prince and I share an interest in literature, Catherine replied diplomatically, but the content of our correspondence is private. And has he introduced you to his diplomatic circle? Inquired another young lady. They say the ambassador from Russia is particularly influential in Westphalia's foreign policy. Before Catherine could formulate a response, Emily appeared at her side, linking their arms with determined cheerfulness. Catherine, the Duchess of Hereford was just asking after you. Shall we join her by the refreshment table? Grateful for the rescue, Catherine allowed her cousin to lead her away from the curious crowd. Thank you, she murmured. I was beginning to feel like an exhibit at Astley's amphitheatre. The price of royal favour, I'm afraid, Emily replied sympathetically. Though it would be easier to bear if the prince were at your side rather than trapped in what appears to be a political discussion of some urgency. Catherine followed her gaze to where Wilhelm now stood with several serious-faced gentlemen, including the foreign secretary and what appeared to be a messenger who had just arrived. The prince's expression had turned grave, his posture tense as he listened to whatever news was being conveyed. I wonder what has happened, Catherine said with a frown. He seemed in excellent spirits when we arrived. Diplomatic matters, no doubt, Emily suggested. The situation in Europe remains volatile despite Napoleon's exile. As they watched, Wilhelm nodded decisively to his companions before glancing around the room, his eyes seeking Catherine. When he found her, he excused himself from the group and made his way to her side. Catherine, he said quietly, dispensing with formality in his evident concern, I must speak with you privately. Would you join me on the terrace for a moment? The seriousness of his tone alarmed her. Of course. As Emily discreetly stepped away, Wilhelm offered Catherine his arm and led her toward the French doors that opened onto the terrace. The night air was indeed fine, warm with the promise of summer, scented with roses from the garden below. But Katherine could take no pleasure in it, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them reassuring. "What is it?" she asked as soon as they had found a relatively private corner of the terrace. "Has something happened?" Wilhelm ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomposure that increased her concern. "I have received news from Westphalia. My father has fallen ill, quite seriously, I'm afraid. I must return home immediately." Katherine felt her heart contract with genuine sympathy. Wilhelm spoke often of his father in his letters, describing a just and progressive ruler who had encouraged his son's education and independent thinking. "I am so sorry," she said, touching his arm gently. "Is there hope for his recovery?" "The doctors are uncertain," Wilhelm replied, his voice tight with emotion. "He has suffered a seizure of some kind. At his age, such events can be unpredictable in their outcome." "When must you leave?" Katherine asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it nonetheless. "Tonight," he said heavily. "A ship is prepared to sail with the evening tide. I came to the ball only to bid you farewell in person rather than by letter." The implication settled over Katherine like a shroud. Wilhelm was leaving, perhaps for months, perhaps longer. Their courtship, so recently begun, would be conducted across the Channel, subject to the vagaries of international post and diplomatic complications. "I understand," she said quietly, fighting to maintain her composure. "Your father needs you. Your country needs you." Wilhelm took her hands in his blue eyes intense in the moonlight. "Katherine, I need you to understand something. This changes nothing between us. My feelings for you remain constant, regardless of distance." She tried to smile, though it felt brittle on her lips. "Feelings have a way of altering with time and circumstance, Your Highness. I would not hold you to words spoken in the heat of courtship when duty calls you elsewhere." "Wilhelm," he corrected gently. "Always Wilhelm to you." His grip on her hands tightened. "And I am not a man whose heart changes direction with every shifting wind. What I feel for you is not a passing fancy or a diversion during my time in England." Katherine wanted desperately to believe him, but Lord Bentham's insinuations and her own doubts whispered in the back of her mind. "You speak with conviction now, but once you return to your court, surrounded by the duties and expectations of your rank." "My conviction will remain unchanged," he insisted. "Katherine, these past weeks have shown me what kind of woman you are, intelligent, principled, refreshingly honest in a world of calculation and artifice. Those qualities do not fade from memory or regard." A flicker of hope kindled in her chest, but Katherine was too pragmatic to give it free rein. "What would you have me do while you are gone? Wait in uncertainty? Face the speculation and pity of society as they watch for signs of royal abandonment?" Wilhelm's expression darkened at her words. "Has someone spoken to you of this? Suggested that my intentions are dishonorable?" "It matters not who spoke," Katherine replied evasively, unwilling to fuel enmity between Wilhelm and Lord Bentham. "The sentiment exists, and not without historical precedent, I imagine." For a moment, anger flashed in Wilhelm's eyes, quickly replaced by determination. "Then I shall give them no room for such speculation," he declared. He hesitated, seeming to wage some internal debate, before continuing with renewed purpose. "Katherine, this is not how or when I had planned this, but perhaps it is fitting that we face our first challenge together." To Katherine's utter astonishment, Wilhelm released her hands only to lower himself to one knee before her, heedless of the dew-damp stone of the terrace. "Katherine Ashton," he said, his voice low but unwavering, "from our first dance, you have captivated me with your mind, your spirit, and your heart. I had intended a longer courtship, a chance for you to be certain of your feelings. But circumstances force my hand, and I find I cannot leave England without knowing that you understand the depth and permanence of my regard." Katherine stood frozen, scarcely breathing, as Wilhelm continued. "I am asking you to be my wife, my princess, and eventually my queen. To stand beside me in duty and in love, to bring your remarkable intelligence and compassion to a role that demands both. It is no small thing I ask, and I would understand if you require time to consider." The world seemed to narrow to this moment, this man kneeling before her with his heart laid bare. Catherine's mind raced with practical considerations, the drastic change in her circumstances, the responsibilities she would assume, the scrutiny she would face. Yet beneath these swirled a deeper current of emotion, a certainty that had been growing steadily since that first waltz. "Wilhelm," she began, her voice hardly more than a whisper, "are you certain? A baronet's daughter as your princess? Will your people accept such a match?" He rose to his feet, taking her hands once more. "My father changed our constitution to allow marriage for love rather than political advantage. My people respect that tradition and will welcome a princess of character and intelligence, regardless of her birth." His eyes searched hers. "The only question that matters is whether you can love me, Wilhelm, enough to accept the burdens that come with loving the prince as well." Catherine looked into his face, the face that had become so dear to her in so short a time, and found her answer written in the hope and vulnerability she saw there. "Yes," she said simply, the word carrying all the certainty her heart contained. "I can. I do." Joy blazed across Wilhelm's features, transforming them in the moonlight. Without hesitation, he drew her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss of promise and passion that left Catherine breathless when they finally parted. "I have no ring to give you tonight," he murmured, still holding her close. "But I shall send one from Westphalia that has belonged to my family for generations. Until then, take this." He removed a signet ring from his little finger, a heavy gold band bearing the royal crest of Westphalia. "Wear it on your chain as a token of my promise." As he placed the ring in her palm, the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. Katherine Ashton, who had entered this season with no greater ambition than to avoid a loveless marriage, was now betrothed to a prince. "We should return inside," she said somewhat dazedly. "My parents will be informed immediately," Wilhelm assured her. "I had already spoken to your father this morning, seeking his blessing should the opportunity arise to propose." Catherine blinked in surprise. "You had planned to ask me tonight? Before the news from Westphalia?" Wilhelm smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear with tender familiarity. "I had planned to ask you after a proper courtship of at least a month. But my feelings have been decided since our conversation in the Duchess of Hereford's alcove. The news merely hastened my timeline." As they re-entered the ballroom, Catherine was aware of the curious glances directed their way, the speculation that must be running rampant about their private conference on the terrace. But for once, she found herself impervious to society's scrutiny, buoyed by a joy too profound for self-consciousness. They found her parents conversing with the Earl and Countess of Wexford near the refreshment table. At their approach, Sir Thomas took one look at their expressions and nodded almost imperceptibly, a smile tugging at his lips. "Your Highness," he greeted Wilhelm, "I see you have spoken to my daughter." "I have, Sir Thomas," Wilhelm confirmed, his hand warm at Catherine's waist. "And she has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal." Lady Ashton's gasp was audible even over the music and chatter of the ballroom. "Catherine," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock and delight. "Is this true?" Catherine nodded, feeling a smile break across her face. "It is, Mamma. I am to be married." The Countess of Wexford, a formidable society matron known for her sharp tongue and sharper wit, regarded Catherine with newfound respect. "Well, it seems the season has produced its most remarkable match. May I be the first to offer my congratulations, Your Highness, and to you, Miss Ashton. Or should I say, Your Royal Highness-to-be?" Word spread through the ballroom with the speed of a summer thunderstorm. Within minutes, they were surrounded by well-wishers, some sincere, others merely eager to associate themselves with the sensation of the season. Catherine clung to Wilhelm's arm, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her social standing. "I must leave soon," he murmured in her ear as they received congratulations from yet another noble couple. "The tide waits for no man, not even a prince." Catherine felt a pang of impending separation but squared her shoulders. "Then we shall make the most of these last moments. And I shall wait for your letters with greater anticipation than ever." As the evening wound to a close, Wilhelm made a brief announcement to the assembled company, confirming their engagement and his imminent departure for Westphalia due to the king's illness. The news was received with a buzz of excitement and concern, the ton already calculating the political implications of both developments. Their farewell, when it came, was necessarily public but no less poignant for being observed by dozens of curious eyes. Wilhelm bowed over Catherine's hand, pressing a kiss to her fingers that lingered just long enough to convey the depth of his feelings. "Until we meet again, my love," he said softly, for her ears alone. "Know that my heart travels with you, even as duty takes me elsewhere." "And mine with you," Catherine replied, fighting back tears that would not do for such a public setting. "Give my best wishes to your father for his recovery." With a final, lingering look, Wilhelm departed, leaving Catherine to face the swirling currents of London society as the future Princess of Westphalia. It was a role she had never imagined, never prepared for, yet as she touched the heavy signet ring now hanging from a chain around her neck, Catherine knew with bone-deep certainty that she would rise to its challenges. For what had begun as just another dance had become the first step in a journey beyond her wildest dreams, a journey of love, duty, and the promise of a shared future with a man who saw her truly, and chose her anyway. 3 months later, Catherine stood at the bow of the royal yacht of Westphalia, watching as the coastline of her future kingdom emerged from the morning mist. Beside her, Emily clutched her arm in excitement. "It's like something from a fairy tale," her cousin breathed, taking in the medieval towers and spires that crowned the approaching shoreline. "I still cannot believe my practical, book-loving Catherine is about to become a princess." Catherine smiled, though her stomach fluttered with a complex mixture of anticipation and nerves. "Nor can I, at times. Though Wilhelm's letters have done much to prepare me for what lies ahead." Those letters, passionate, detailed, and unfailingly honest, had been her lifeline during their separation. Wilhelm had written of his father's slow recovery, the affairs of state he had managed in the king's absence, and most importantly, his unwavering love and longing for her arrival. Her own letters had grown increasingly confident as she studied Westphalia's history, culture, and language under the tutelage of a diplomat Wilhelm had arranged to visit her daily. The past months had been a whirlwind of preparation, endless fittings for a royal trousseau, lessons in court protocol, and carefully orchestrated public appearances to acquaint the British public with their baronet's daughter who had captured a prince's heart. Now, as Westphalia's capital city of Kronberg drew nearer, Catherine touched the diamond and sapphire engagement ring that had arrived from Wilhelm a week after his departure, an heirloom, he had written, worn by princesses of Westphalia for 2 centuries, symbolizing loyalty and steadfast love. "There he is!" Emily exclaimed suddenly, pointing toward the harbour where a large reception party awaited their arrival. Even from this distance, Catherine could distinguish Wilhelm's tall figure at the head of the delegation, resplendent in what appeared to be a formal military uniform. As the yacht glided into the harbour, a band struck up what Catherine recognized as Westphalia's national anthem, followed by "God Save the King" in a gracious nod to her British heritage. Flags snapped in the breeze, and cheers rose from the gathered crowd as the vessel docked and the gangplank was secured. "Ready?" Sir Thomas asked quietly, appearing at her side. He and Lady Ashton had accompanied Catherine on this journey, along with Emily as her lady-in-waiting and a small entourage of British servants who would form part of her household. "As I'll ever be," Catherine replied, straightening her shoulders beneath her travelling cloak of deep blue velvet. The captain of the yacht approached with a bow. "Your Royal Highness, if you would do us the honour of disembarking first? His Highness Prince Wilhelm awaits you." The title still startled her, though she had been practicing responding to it for months. With a deep breath, Catherine moved forward, her father at her side, and stepped onto Westphalian soil for the first time. Wilhelm stood waiting at the foot of the gangplank, his face alight with joy and something deeper, a possessive pride that sent a shiver of pleasure down Catherine's spine. As protocol demanded, she curtsied deeply before him, only to be raised immediately to her feet and enfolded in an embrace that balanced perfectly between royal dignity and genuine emotion. "My Catherine," he murmured against her hair. "At last." "My Wilhelm," she replied, drawing back to look into the beloved face she had missed so desperately. "How fares your father?" Wilhelm's expression softened at her concern. "Much improved, thanks to your healing tisanes. He is most eager to meet the remarkable woman who prescribed remedies from across the sea." Catherine blushed, recalling the herbal preparation she had sent after learning of the king's symptoms. They were merely my grandmother's recipes, nothing more. They worked where our court physicians had failed, Wilhelm replied, offering her his arm as they turned to face the assembled dignitaries. You have already won my father's approval, and now you shall meet the rest of your new court. What followed was a blur of introductions, ministers, courtiers, noble families, all regarding her with varying degrees of curiosity and respect. Catherine summoned her intensive language lessons, addressing each in carefully practiced Westphalian, earning approving nods and warm smiles for her efforts. You have been studying diligently, Wilhelm remarked as they progressed through the reception line. Your accent is remarkably good. I had an excellent teacher, she replied. And motivation beyond measure. I would not embarrass you before your people. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, squeezing gently. You could never embarrass me, Catherine. Your willingness to embrace our language and customs has already endeared you to many. Indeed, as their carriage procession wound through the streets of Kronborg toward the royal palace, Catherine was touched by the enthusiastic welcome from citizens who lined the route, waving flags and throwing flowers. Children in traditional dress presented bouquets at various stops, and she made a point to speak to each one in their language, winning smiles and childish giggles with her careful phrases. They adore you already, Emily whispered from her seat opposite Catherine and Wilhelm in the royal carriage. And who could blame them? You look every inch a princess. Catherine's hand strayed to the elegant chignon her lady's maid had arranged that morning, adorned with the diamond tiara Wilhelm had sent as a wedding gift. The weight of it still felt foreign, but she was determined to carry herself with the dignity her new role required. As the palace came into view, a magnificent structure of pale stone and soaring towers set amid formal gardens, Catherine felt a momentary panic. This was to be her home, these gardens her daily view, these people her subjects. The enormity of the change in her circumstances threatened to overwhelm her. Wilhelm, ever attuned to her moods, took her hand. It is a great deal to absorb at once, he said quietly. But remember, behind these walls are simply people, some kind, some difficult, all human. And at day's end, it will be just you and I in our private apartments, free to be ourselves. Catherine drew strength from his steady gaze and the warmth of his hand. Just Wilhelm and Catherine. Always, he promised. No matter what titles the world bestows upon us. The carriage passed through imposing gates and into a grand courtyard where an honor guard stood at attention. As they drew to a halt, Wilhelm leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. One last thing before we enter. I love you, Katherine Ashton. Not for what you bring to Westphalia, not for how you appear on my arm, but for who you are in your heart. Never doubt that. Tears pricked Catherine's eyes at the simple sincerity in his voice. And I love you, Wilhelm. The man even more than the prince. Their lips met in a brief, tender kiss before the carriage door opened and they stepped out to face their future together, a future born from one fateful dance that had led to this most unexpected of destinations. As Catherine took Wilhelm's arm and ascended the palace steps to meet his father the king, she reflected that life, like a dance, was a matter of following the right partner through its intricate patterns. And she had found hers in a prince who valued honesty above flattery, substance above show, and love above all else. In the end, perhaps it was not so surprising after all. For while she had thought it just another dance, Prince Wilhelm had planned from the first measure to make it the opening movement of their life's duet, a partnership of equals, a harmony of hearts, a dance that would continue through all the measures of their days. And Catherine, once so cynical about love and marriage, found herself stepping eagerly into the music, ready to follow wherever it might lead.